Welcome to another episode of Christmas Devotions. Today we will look at the title Immanuel and see how it is relevant to us as we celebrate another Christmas. The name Immanuel appears twice in the Old Testament and once in the New Testament. It is derived from the Hebrew words Immanu, meaning with us, and El, meaning God. So it is literally God with us. The prophecy of Immanuel is first mentioned in Isaiah chapter 7 verse 14, where it says, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and will call him Immanuel." The context of Isaiah chapter 7 is a political and spiritual crisis in Judah during the time of King Ahaz. The king of Israel and the king of Aram, that is Syria, formed an alliance to attack Judah. Their intention was to force King Ahaz to join their coalition against Assyria. Now, this crisis caused great fear and panic in Judah. Isaiah describes this scenario in chapter 7, verse 2, saying, "When the house of David heard that Aram, that is Syria, had aligned itself with Ephraim, that is Israel, the heart of Ahaz and the heart of his people shook as the trees of the forest shake before the wind." It clearly describes how terrified the people were, like trees trembling in a strong wind. Now, King Ahaz had two options: to join the alliance with Syria and Israel against Assyria, or to seek Assyria's help to fight Syria and Israel. It is in this context God sent the prophet Isaiah to encourage Ahaz and urge him to trust in God's power instead of relying on human alliances. But despite this assurance, King Ahaz did not trust God and instead chose to rely on Assyria for help. It is at this point Isaiah gave a divine sign. "Behold, the virgin will conceive and bear a son and shall call his name Immanuel." This sign, Immanuel, was a promise that God would be with his people even in their troubled times. It is a reminder to trust him even when human leaders fail. In the New Testament, Matthew recalls this prophecy in Matthew chapter 1:23, referring to Jesus Christ, saying, "Behold, the virgin shall be with child and bear a son, and they shall call his name Immanuel." In both Isaiah and Matthew, the prophecy is introduced with the word "behold" to highlight the extraordinary nature of this prophecy. The name Immanuel shows God's great love. He came down to earth to restore the relationship broken by sin. When our sin made it impossible for us to reach God, God did something extraordinary. He came to us. In fact, there was never a time when God was not with his people. Starting from the Garden of Eden, where God walked with Adam and Eve on a daily basis, to the tabernacle and later the temple, where he dwelt among the Israelites, God has always desired to be close to his people. A wonderful example of God's presence is in the giving of the 10 Commandments. When God made a covenant with his people, he gave them the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments were not just rules, but a covenant, a treaty between God and his people. The biblical traditions clearly state that the 10 Commandments were written on 2 stone tablets, inscribed on both sides. It is commonly understood that one tablet had 5 commandments and the other had the remaining 5. This is the typical depiction seen in illustrations of the 10 Commandments. But the repeated emphasis in the Old Testament that there were 2 tablets and they were inscribed on both the sides suggests that they were actually 2 copies of the same covenant. In other words, both tablets were identical. Ancient practices of making treaties support this theory. In the ancient Near East, when 2 kings, a sovereign king and a vassal, made a treaty, 2 identical copies of the treaty were made and each party was given a copy. For example, in 1271 BC, which is the earliest known surviving peace treaty, when the treaty was signed between the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II and the king of the Hittites, two copies of the treaty were created. During archaeological excavations, the Egyptian copy was found in Egypt and the Hittite copy was found in Turkey. Both copies were identical in its content, and in each case, the treaty was kept safe in their respective temples. Similarly, the two tablets of the Ten Commandments represented God's copy and Israel's copy. But instead of keeping them separately, both were kept together in the tabernacle. This symbolized that God's dwelling place was not distant from his people. God's dwelling place was with his people, which is why even God's copy of the covenant was kept in the custody of his people. Another beautiful example of God's presence is in Jacob's dream at Bethel, recorded in Genesis chapter 28, verse 12 to 17. While fleeing from Esau, Jacob saw a ladder connecting heaven and earth, with angels ascending and descending on it. The Lord stood beside Jacob and assured him, saying, "Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go." Now, this dream shows God's desire to stay connected with his people. The ladder symbolizes a bridge between heaven and earth, showing that God is not distant. The angels ascending and descending on the ladder symbolize the ongoing interaction between heaven and earth, demonstrating that God is actively involved in human life. Jacob recognized this. That is why when he woke up, he said, "Surely the Lord is in this place and I did not know it. Surely the Lord is in this place and I did not know it." That is why he named the place Bethel, meaning house of God. When we come to the New Testament, in John chapter 1:51, Jesus refers to Jacob's dream, saying, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." Here, Jesus identifies himself as the true bridge between heaven and earth, the one through whom God's presence is fully realized among humanity. Thus, the ultimate fulfillment of Immanuel is in Jesus Christ. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. John chapter 1 verse 14. The Greek word used for dwelt is skino, which literally means tabernacled, directly linking Jesus to God's presence in the Old Testament tabernacle. This emphasizes that in Jesus, God's desire to dwell with his people was fulfilled in its most complete and personal form. In the New Testament, believers themselves are called as God's temple, showing that God continues to live among his people. Further, the Bible concludes with a promise of eternal fellowship with God in Revelation chapter 21 verse 3. See, the home or tabernacle of God is with his people, and he will dwell with them. Look, God's dwelling is with humanity, and he will live with them. That is how the New Testament ends. Each of these examples demonstrate God's unchanging desire to be with his people, to guide, to protect, and fellowship with them. The birth of Jesus shows the unique way God chose to dwell with us by becoming human himself, by becoming one among us. He chose to become human, born in a humble stable, to be one of us. No other faith offers this kind of closeness with God. In other faith traditions, gods are often seen as distant and far from people. Holiness is seen as staying separate from humanity. Though Scripture also demands separation from sin, our loving God did not leave us in that state of separation. God's love for us was so great that he made a way to bridge the gap between his holiness and our sinfulness. He sent his one and only Son Jesus to bring us close to him, making it possible for us to share in his holiness and be in his presence always. Remember this the next time you feel discouraged. Jesus is still Immanuel. He is still God with us. He knows our pains. He understands our struggles. He walks with us in our darkest valleys. He hears our prayers, even the unspoken cries of our hearts. He is closer than a friend and more loving than we can imagine. No matter the circumstances, he is our ever-present help and hope. He is Immanuel. May this reminder of God's constant presence give us peace, joy, and comfort this Christmas season. Happy Christmas.